No one lasted 1 month, until it came, and changed the billionaire CEO worlds. Billionaire with the untamable heart, he thought he'd seen every kind of betrayal, until she walked in. Albert Johnson had a reputation that preceded him like a storm warning. In the gleaming towers of Manhattan's financial district, his name was whispered with equal parts reverence and dread. At 34, he had built Johnson Global Enterprises into a $12 billion empire, but his personal life was a revolving door that spun faster than his quarterly earnings reports. Before we begin the beautiful story, please subscribe, it's free, and it makes my day 100% better. Also like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. 1 month. That was the shelf life of anyone who tried to get close to Albert Johnson. Executive assistants lasted 23 days on average before tendering their resignations, citing creative differences or pursuing other opportunities. Corporate speak for "I can't handle this man for another second." His romantic entanglements followed a similar pattern. 3 weeks of intensity, followed by a clean break executed with the precision of a leveraged buyout. The HR department at Johnson Global had a pool going. Not if the next assistant would quit, but when. Then Cindy Reeves walked through the door on a Monday morning in October, and everything Albert Johnson thought he knew about control began to unravel. She arrived at 7:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her scheduled start time, wearing a charcoal suit that somehow managed to be both perfectly professional and utterly distinctive. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that suggested efficiency without severity, and when she extended her hand to Albert in his corner office overlooking Central Park, her grip was firm enough to make a statement without trying to prove anything. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that felt genuine rather than practiced. "I'm looking forward to making your life easier." Albert had heard variations of this greeting 43 times before. He'd perfected his response to a science: a brief handshake, a curt nod, and an immediate dive into the impossible demands that would begin the countdown to resignation. "My last assistant filed 847 emails incorrectly," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I need someone who understands the difference between urgent and important, who can anticipate needs before they arise, and who won't fall apart when I tell them to book a flight to Singapore that departed 10 minutes ago." Cinder smiled, not the nervous, eager-to-please smile he was accustomed to, but something more knowing. "Then it's fortunate I have a gift for solving impossible problems. Shall we begin with today's agenda, or would you prefer to test me with something more challenging first?" Something flickered in Albert's chest, an unfamiliar sensation that felt suspiciously like intrigue. He quickly suppressed it. She was assistant number 44. She would last 3 weeks, maybe 4 if she was exceptionally resilient, and then she'd be gone like all the others. He had no idea he was wrong about everything. Albert Johnson didn't believe in easing people into their roles. He believed in trial by fire, in discovering a person's breaking point before they became a liability. So on Cindy's first day, he threw everything at her. At 8:15 a.m., he informed her that the board of directors meeting scheduled for Thursday had been moved to today, in 90 minutes, and the presentation deck was incomplete. By 8:47 a.m., Cindy had not only completed the deck but had identified 3 statistical errors in the existing slides and corrected them without being asked. At 10:30 a.m., Albert mentioned, casually, as if it were an afterthought, that he needed reservations at Oriole for 8 people at 7 p.m. The restaurant had been booked solid for 3 months. By 11:15 a.m., Cindy had secured the table, arranged for Albert's preferred wine to be waiting, and had dietary restrictions for all 8 guests on file. At 2:47 p.m., he gave her a list of 17 international calls to schedule across 8 time zones, all before end of business. By 4:30 p.m., every call was arranged, with briefing documents prepared for each conversation. "You're efficient," Albert admitted as the day wound down, and he couldn't quite keep the surprise from his voice. "You're predictable," Cindy replied, and there was no edge to her words, just a statement of fact. "You test people to see if they'll break. But I don't break easily, Mr. Johnson." "We'll see," he said, but for the first time in years, he wasn't entirely certain of the outcome. Wednesday brought the first sign that Cindy Reeves was not like the others. Albert had a ritual on Wednesdays, a lunch meeting with Marcus Chen, Johnson Global's chief financial officer and the only person Albert considered something close to a friend. They met at a small Italian place in Midtown, away from the office, where they could speak freely about strategy, competition, and the occasional glimpse of the humans they used to be before ambition consumed them whole. Cindy had arranged the reservation without being asked, had his preferred table ready, and had his afternoon schedule cleared for exactly 90 minutes. Not the 2 hours he usually took, but the 90 minutes these lunches actually required. She's different, Marcus observed, watching Cindy through the restaurant window as she waited in the car, working on her laptop. That's what, day 3? Usually by now they're crying in the bathroom or updating their resumes. Albert frowned into his espresso. She's competent. That's all. Competent. Marcus laughed. Albert, she reorganized your entire filing system, streamlined your meeting protocols, and somehow convinced Jennifer from legal to actually respond to emails within the same day. That's not competent. That's miraculous. She's just doing her job. No, Marcus said, leaning forward with the intensity of someone about to deliver an uncomfortable truth. She's doing it without being terrified of you. That's the difference. Every other assistant has walked on eggshells, trying not to trigger your temper. She just works. Like your approval or disapproval doesn't factor into her equation at all. Albert wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because Marcus was right. Cindy didn't flinch when he raised his voice. She didn't scramble to apologize when he changed his mind for the 3rd time about a meeting agenda. She simply adapted, adjusted, and moved forward with a calm that was unsettling. That afternoon, he tested her differently. I need you to tell me, he said, appearing at her desk at 4 p.m., what you think is the biggest weakness in our Q3 strategy presentation. Previous assistants would have deflected, claimed they weren't qualified to judge, or offered some generic platitude. Cindy looked up from her computer, met his eyes steadily, and said, You're underselling the Southeast Asian market expansion. The numbers are there, but you're burying them in the appendix. If I were your competitor, I'd be relieved you're not making a bigger deal of that advantage. Albert felt something twist in his chest, part irritation at being critiqued, part something else entirely. You've been here 3 days. You're an assistant, not a strategist. I'm an assistant who reads everything that crosses your desk, Cindy replied calmly. You asked for my opinion. I gave it. What you do with it is your choice. She returned to her work without waiting for his response, and Albert found himself standing there, dismissed by his own employee, unable to decide if he was angry or impressed. He moved the Southeast Asian data to page 3 of the presentation. In the following week's board meeting, it would generate $400 million in additional investment interest. Friday afternoon, Albert overheard something that stopped him in his tracks. He'd been heading toward the executive break room when he caught the sound of voices from the open door of the HR department. Sandra Morrison, the HR director, was speaking in that particular tone that meant someone was in trouble. Against company policy to participate in gambling on company premises, Sandra was saying. It's not gambling, it's a prediction pool, came a defensive voice Albert recognized as belonging to Tom from accounting. You're betting on how long Mr. Johnson's new assistant will last. That is absolutely gambling, and it's also incredibly inappropriate. Albert should have walked away, should have filed the information for later disciplinary action. Instead, he found himself stopping just outside the door, listening. Oh, come on, Tom protested. Everyone knows Johnson goes through assistants like. That's enough, Sandra cut him off. The pool is shut down, effective immediately. And for what it's worth, I think you're all going to lose your money anyway. Cindy Reeves is different. Different how? Another voice asked, Rachel from marketing. Different like she doesn't care if he's a billionaire or a difficult boss. She just does her job and doesn't let him get to her. That's the kind of different that lasts. Albert walked away before he heard more, but the conversation gnawed at him for the rest of the afternoon. They'd been betting on Cindy's failure, on his inability to keep an assistant for more than a month. And the truly unsettling part was that they were right to bet that way. He had a pattern. He knew he had a pattern. But as he watched Cindy through his office window, head bent over her work, occasionally tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that seemed unconscious and unguarded, he realized something uncomfortable. He didn't want this one to leave. Monday morning arrived with the kind of rain that turned New York into a blur of umbrellas and angry taxi horns. Albert arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m., soaked despite his driver's best efforts, in a mood as dark as the clouds overhead. A deal he'd been working on for 6 months had fallen through over the weekend. A competitor had swooped in with a better offer, and Albert's team hadn't seen it coming. In the grand scheme of his empire, it was a relatively minor loss, $200 million that would barely dent his bottom line, but Albert Johnson didn't lose. He won. That was the rule he'd built his life around. He stormed past Cindy's desk without a word, and she didn't try to stop him. Smart. He needed to be alone to strategize, to figure out how to salvage something from this disaster, to remind himself why he was the best at what he did. 20 minutes later, there was a gentle knock on his door. Not now, he barked. The door opened anyway. Cindy walked in carrying a cup of coffee, made exactly the way he liked it, strong enough to strip paint, and a thin folder. I said not now, Albert repeated, but there was less heat in his voice. She wasn't cowering, wasn't apologizing. She was just there. The Meridian deal fell through, Cindy said, setting the coffee on his desk. It wasn't a question. Obviously. I pulled some research over the weekend. She placed the folder next to the coffee. Harrington Industries, the company that outbid you, has serious cash flow problems. They went big on this acquisition, probably too big. They'll need to divest at least 2 subsidiary companies within the next quarter to stay solvent. Albert looked up sharply. How do you know that? I read their SEC filings, and I have a friend who works at their bank. She said it casually, as if corporate intelligence gathering was just another item on her to-do list. The 2 subsidiaries they'll most likely sell are in that folder. Both would fit Johnson Global's portfolio perfectly, and you could acquire them for significantly less than you would have paid for the original Meridian assets. For a long moment, Albert just stared at her. Then he opened the folder. The research was thorough, the analysis sharp, the opportunity clear. This wasn't assistant work. This was the kind of strategic thinking he paid his senior executives 7 figures to produce. Why are you working as an assistant? The question escaped before he could stop it. Cindy smiled, and there was something enigmatic in the expression. Because I wanted to learn from the best. And because I believe in being excellent at whatever role I'm in, not just focused on the role I want next. That's a diplomatic answer. It's also the truth. She moved toward the door, then paused. Mr. Johnson, the Meridian deal fell through because your team was looking at it from a position of strength. Sometimes losses reveal opportunities we couldn't see when we were winning. She left, and Albert sat there with her words echoing in his mind. He picked up the coffee, took a sip, and allowed himself the smallest smile. Then he called his M&A team and told them to start preparing acquisition proposals for the 2 companies Cindy had identified. Within 3 months, both deals would close, netting Johnson Global a profit of $340 million more than the original Meridian acquisition would have generated. Thursday evening found Albert in his penthouse apartment, staring at his closet with an unfamiliar sense of indecision. He had a charity gala to attend, one of those obligations that came with being a billionaire, where appearances mattered as much as the actual donations. Usually, he went alone. Sometimes he brought whatever woman he happened to be dating that week, if the relationship had progressed that far. But the last relationship had ended 2 months ago, and he hadn't bothered starting a new one. His phone buzzed. A text from Cindy. Reminder, gala at 7 p.m. Car will be downstairs at 6:45. You're presenting the Education Initiative Award at 8:30. Speech is in your email. He stared at the message, then did something impulsive. He called her. Yes, Mr. Johnson. Her voice was professional, even at 5:30 p.m. The gala tonight. Do you have plans? A pause. I was going to finish reviewing the Henderson contracts and then probably order too much Thai food and watch a documentary about con artists. Despite himself, Albert smiled. Come to the gala instead. As your assistant. As my guest. The pause was longer this time. Is this a test? Because I should tell you, I'm not interested in blurring professional boundaries. It's not a test. It's a work function where I could actually use someone who knows what they're doing. My usual plus ones are decorative. You're useful. You have such a way with words, Mr. Johnson. How has no woman snatched you up yet? The sarcasm caught him off guard, and he laughed, actually laughed, something that happened so rarely his face felt strange forming the expression. Is that a yes or no? It's a yes to attending a work function. Not a date. Understood. Wear something formal. Car picks you up at 6:30. He hung up before she could respond, then immediately wondered if he'd made a mistake. Bringing Cindy to a social event would fuel gossip. People would assume. They always assumed. But for some reason he didn't want to examine too closely. He didn't care. The gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and when Albert arrived, the Great Hall was already filled with Manhattan's elite, old money mixing uncomfortably with tech billionaires, Hollywood celebrities air-kissing hedge fund managers, all of them united in their commitment to being seen supporting worthy causes. He'd been there for 15 minutes, nursing a glass of champagne and deflecting attempts at conversation, when Cindy arrived. She wore a deep navy dress that somehow managed to be elegant without trying to compete with the more ostentatious gowns around her. Her hair was down, falling in waves over her shoulders, and she moved through the crowd with an ease that suggested she belonged there, not because of money or status, but because she was comfortable in her own skin. You clean up well, Albert said when she reached him. You're still terrible at compliments, Cindy replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. But thank you. This is quite a crowd. Most of them are insufferable. Fair warning. Then I'll fit right in with you. He was about to respond when Margaret Caldwell materialized beside them, 70 years old, worth approximately $3 billion, and the sharpest investor Albert knew. She had a talent for appearing exactly when she wanted to and disappearing just as quickly. Albert, Margaret said, her eyes sliding to Cindy with undisguised curiosity. Are you going to introduce me to your companion, or shall I introduce myself? Margaret Caldwell, this is Cindy Reeves, my executive assistant. Your assistant? Margaret's eyebrows rose. How refreshingly honest. Usually, men like Albert claim their companions are consultants or advisors. I am his assistant, Cindy said smoothly, though I've been consulting and advising him quite a bit this week, so perhaps the distinction is blurrier than it appears. Margaret laughed, a genuine sound that drew attention from nearby conversations. I like her, Albert. Try not to lose this one to a competitor. She drifted away, and Cindy turned to Albert with amusement in her eyes. Does everyone in your world speak in corporate metaphors? Only the successful ones. Come on, I should introduce you to some people before I have to give this speech. What followed was a strange hour where Albert found himself showing Cindy off, not as a romantic conquest, but as someone interesting, someone worth knowing. He introduced her to venture capitalists and philanthropists, to artists and politicians, and watched as she held her own in every conversation. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just engaged genuinely, asked intelligent questions, and remembered details about people's work that made them light up when she referenced them later. By the time Albert had to give his speech, he'd realized something uncomfortable. He was having more fun at this gala than he'd had at any social event in years, and it was entirely because of Cindy. His speech was polished and well received, but when he returned to where he'd left Cindy, she was gone. He found her on one of the museum's balconies, looking out at the city lights, her champagne glass dangling from her fingers. Hiding? He asked, stepping beside her. Recharging, she corrected. Too many people asking too many questions about what it's like to work for the infamous Albert Johnson. And what did you tell them? She looked at him then, her expression unreadable in the low light. I told them it's the most challenging job I've ever had, and the most interesting. Something passed between them in that moment, something that had nothing to do with work hierarchies or professional boundaries. Albert felt it like a physical pull, dangerous and intoxicating. Cindy, he started, not knowing how to finish the sentence. We should get back inside, she said, but she didn't move. Neither did he. They stood there for another minute, the city spreading out below them, before the spell broke and they returned to the gala. But something had shifted, and they both knew it. Day 14, the line. Friday morning, Albert was already in his office when Cindy arrived at 7:45. She looked tired. There were faint shadows under her eyes that makeup didn't quite hide, and she set her bag down her desk with more force than usual. Late night? Albert asked from his doorway. Couldn't sleep, she admitted, then seemed to catch herself. I'll get your calendar sorted. Cindy. She looked up, and he saw something in her expression he hadn't seen before, uncertainty. About last night, Albert said, walking to her desk. I think we should talk about. We don't need to talk about anything, Cindy interrupted. Last night was a work event. It went well. That's all there is to discuss. That's not all. Mr. Johnson. Her voice was firm now, professional. I have a rule. I don't get involved with people I work for. Ever. It's a line I don't cross. I wasn't suggesting. Yes, you were. Maybe not consciously, but we both felt it last night. And I need to be clear. I value this job. I value working with you, learning from you. But I won't compromise that for something that would inevitably complicate everything. Albert should have been relieved. She was drawing a boundary, saving them both from a mistake. But instead, he felt something like disappointment settle in his chest. You're right, he said finally. Professional boundaries. Understood. Good. But her voice was softer now, almost regretful. Now, you have a meeting with the Singapore team in 20 minutes, and they're going to try to lowball the manufacturing costs. I've prepared some counter-arguments. They didn't speak about the gala again, but the memory of it hung between them like unfinished business. Day 17, the breakdown. Monday started normally enough. Albert was in a strategy meeting with his senior leadership team, discussing an aggressive expansion into European markets. The projections were solid, the risks manageable, and he was about to give the go-ahead when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Cindy. Need you back at the office. Now. Albert excused himself, something he never did in the middle of strategic meetings, and found Cindy waiting outside his office, her expression grave. What happened? Victoria happened. Victoria Ashford. The name hit Albert like a bucket of ice water. Victoria was his ex-girlfriend from 3 years ago, the only relationship he'd had that lasted longer than a few months, the only woman he genuinely thought he might have a future with. It had ended spectacularly badly when she'd sold information about Johnson Global's planned merger to a tabloid, netting herself a 6-figure payout and nearly derailing a $2 billion deal. What does she want? She showed up at reception claiming to be your fiancé and demanding to see you. Security stopped her, but not before she caused a scene and threatened to go to the press with explosive information about your business practices. Albert felt rage building in his chest, the cold, controlled kind that made his employees walk softly for days. She has no information. She's bluffing. Maybe, but she knows how to manipulate the media cycle. Even if her claims are baseless, the headline alone could impact your stock price and the European expansion announcement. So we get ahead of it. Release a statement calling her a disgruntled ex-girlfriend trying to extort money. Or, Cinder said carefully, we give her what she wants. Absolutely not. I don't negotiate with. Hear me out. Cindy stepped closer, her voice low. Victoria wants attention and money. If we give her a settlement, not huge, just enough to make her feel like she won, and pair it with an ironclad NDA, she has no incentive to go to the press. She gets paid, you get silence, everyone moves on. That's rewarding her for threatening me. That's protecting your company from a distraction you don't need during a crucial expansion. Sometimes the smart move isn't the satisfying move. Albert wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because she was right. Dragging this out publicly would be a headache he didn't need, and Victoria knew enough about his business operations to cause problems even if her claims were exaggerated. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. Handle it. but the settlement comes with consequences if she ever approaches me or anyone at this company again. Already drafting the terms, Cindy said, and there was something almost protective in her expression. And Mr. Johnson? I'm sorry you have to deal with people like her. The sympathy in her voice caught him off guard. Most people in his life were either afraid of him or wanting something from him. Sympathy was a rare commodity. It was my own fault for trusting her in the first place. Trusting people isn't a fault. Being hurt by someone who betrayed that trust doesn't mean you were wrong to give it in the first place. She left to handle the Victoria situation, and Albert stood there, feeling something crack open inside him, something he'd kept carefully sealed since Victoria, since all the relationships that had ended badly, since he'd learned that money and power made him a target rather than a partner. By end of day, Cindy had brokered a settlement with Victoria's lawyer. $150,000, a comprehensive NDA with penalty clauses that would bankrupt Victoria if she violated it, and a guarantee that she would never contact Albert or anyone at Johnson Global again. It was clean, efficient, and final. You're wasted as an assistant, Albert said when Cindy brought him the signed documents. I'm not wasted, she replied. I'm exactly where I choose to be. Why? You could be running your own company, making 10 times what I pay you. Cindy was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of his desk. Because success isn't just about making money or having power. It's about becoming excellent at what you do. And I'm learning more working for you than I would anywhere else. Learning what? How to manage a difficult boss. Learning how to think strategically. How to make decisions under pressure. How to build something that lasts. She met his eyes. And maybe learning that the people everyone thinks are untouchable are just as human as the rest of us. It was the most personal thing she'd said to him in 3 weeks, and it landed with unexpected weight. Is that what you think I am? Untouchable. I think you've built walls so high that most people don't bother trying to climb them anymore. They just assume you want to be alone up there. And what do you think? I think, Cindy said slowly, that nobody actually wants to be alone. We just get tired of being disappointed by people who can't handle our sharp edges. She left before he could respond, and Albert sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home, thinking about walls and sharp edges and the woman who somehow kept finding ways past his defenses without even trying. Wednesday afternoon, Albert found Cindy crying in the supply room. He'd been looking for her to review a contract when he heard the sound, quiet, suppressed, the kind of crying that came from someone who didn't want to be heard. He should have walked away, given her privacy. Instead, he opened the door. Cindy. She turned away quickly, wiping at her eyes. I'm fine. Just needed a minute. I'll be right there. You're not fine. Albert closed the door behind him, making the small space feel even smaller. What happened? It's nothing. Just a personal matter. It won't affect my work. I'm not asking as your boss. I'm asking as, he paused, searching for the right word, as someone who cares. That made her turn around, and he could see her eyes were red, her careful composure cracked. My mom called. She needs surgery, a heart procedure that's not covered by insurance. I have savings, but not enough for this, and I don't know how I'm going to. She trailed off, looking embarrassed to have shared even that much. Albert's response was immediate. How much do you need? No. Cindy shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. I'm not taking money from you. It's not taking, it's accepting help. From my boss. That's exactly the kind of boundary complication I was talking about. Then consider it a bonus. You've saved me millions of dollars in the 3 weeks you've been here. You've earned it. Albert. She stopped, seeming to realize she'd used his first name. Mr. Johnson. I can't. It wouldn't be right. What wouldn't be right is you worrying about your mother's health when I have the means to help and choose not to. He pulled out his phone. Give me the details. I'll have my accountant handle it directly with the hospital. Why would you do this? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications they'd both been avoiding. Because, Albert said carefully, you matter. Not just as an employee, as a person. And people who matter don't have to face their problems alone. Cindy's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. I'll pay you back. Every cent. If that makes you feel better about accepting help, fine. But there's no timeline, no interest, no pressure. Thank you, she whispered, and the gratitude in her voice made something tighten in Albert's chest. He made the call to his accountant right there, arranging for the hospital bills to be paid in full. When he hung up, Cindy was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Your walls aren't as high as people think, she said softly. Or maybe you're just better at climbing than most. They stood there in the supply room, surrounded by staplers and printer paper, and Albert realized with uncomfortable clarity that something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't just his assistant anymore. She wasn't just someone competent and interesting. She was someone he thought about when he should be thinking about market trends and acquisition strategies. Someone whose opinion mattered in ways that had nothing to do with business. Someone dangerous. We should get back to work, Cindy said, breaking the moment. Yeah, Albert agreed, but neither of them moved immediately. When they finally returned to the office, everyone else had gone home. They worked side by side for another 3 hours, reviewing contracts and preparing for the next day's meetings. And if anyone had been watching, they might have noticed how the professional distance between them had narrowed, how the air felt different, charged with possibility and restrained desire. Friday brought Marcus Chen to Albert's office with a concerned expression. We need to talk about Cindy. I heard you have a new assistant, Eleanor said, her tone carefully casual. Margaret Caldwell mentioned meeting her at the gala. Cindy. Yes. And what? Albert. Emma finally put down her phone. Mom is asking if you're sleeping with her. Emma. Eleanor sounded scandalized, but there was curiosity in her expression too. I'm not sleeping with my assistant, Albert said firmly. She's professional. Excellent at her job. That's all. That's all. Emma raised an eyebrow. Because Margaret told Mom that she saw you two on a balcony looking at each other like you were solving the world's problems or falling in love. Her words, not mine. Margaret is dramatic. Margaret is perceptive. Eleanor called Margaret is perceptive. Eleanor corrected gently. And she said this woman is different. That you actually seemed happy. The word landed like a stone in still water. Happy. Was that what he'd been feeling? Albert had spent so long equating happiness with achievement, successful deals, growing revenue, market dominance, that he'd forgotten what personal happiness felt like. She is different, Albert admitted quietly. But that doesn't mean anything can happen. She works for me. There are boundaries. Boundaries you want to cross, Emma observed. Boundaries she's insisted on maintaining. Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Albert, you've spent your entire adult life building walls. At some point, you have to ask yourself what you're protecting and whether it's worth the isolation. I'm not isolated. I have friends, family. You have people who care about you, Eleanor interrupted. But you don't let anyone close enough to actually know you. Not really. And then you wonder why your relationships don't last. The truth of it settled over him like a weight. His mother was right. He'd been so afraid of being hurt, of being vulnerable, that he'd made himself impenetrable. And now, when someone had somehow found a way past his defenses, he was doing everything he could to rebuild those walls. What if I let her in and it ends badly? Albert asked, the question more vulnerable than anything he'd allowed himself to say in years. What if she sees who I really am and decides it's not worth it? Then at least you'll have tried, Emma said, her usual sarcasm replaced with something gentler. Look, I know I give you crap, but you're not actually as terrible as you think you are. You're just scared. And being scared is boring, Albert. Take the risk. He left his mother's house that night with their words echoing in his mind. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to actually be with someone, not as a temporary arrangement, not as something compartmentalized and controlled, but as a real relationship where vulnerability was part of the foundation. Tuesday morning, Albert made a decision. He arrived at the office early, before Cindy, and spent 30 minutes staring at the city as the sun rose. Then he called Marcus. I need your help with something, Albert said. Something personal. This is about Cindy. How do you always know? Because you only call me about personal matters when you're terrified, and the only thing that terrifies you these days is genuine emotion. Marcus's voice carried warmth. What do you need? I want to offer her a different position, not as my assistant, as a strategic advisor or consultant, something that pays better and removes the direct reporting relationship. So you can ask her out without the ethical complications. So we can figure out what this is without professional boundaries making it impossible. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's actually mature and thoughtful. Who are you and what have you done with Albert Johnson? I'm serious, Marcus. I know, and I think it's the right move. But Albert, make sure you're ready for this. She's not someone you can half-heart your way through. If you're going to do this, you have to actually be present, actually be vulnerable, actually show up as a real person, not just a billionaire CEO. I know. Do you? Because knowing and doing are different things. After hanging up, Albert drafted the proposal himself, not delegating it to HR, not making it a formal corporate memo, but writing it as a genuine offer from one person to another. He outlined the new role, the compensation, significantly more than an assistant salary, and the fact that she would report to Marcus instead of him, creating professional separation. When Cindy arrived at 7:45, he was waiting at her desk. We need to talk, he said. Her expression immediately became guarded. If this is about what I think it's about, just read this first. He handed her the envelope. Cindy opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the page. He watched emotions flicker across her face, surprise, confusion, understanding, and something that might have been hope. You're offering me a different job. I'm offering you a position that better matches your skills and removes the barrier between us. The barrier being that you're my boss. Yes. And if I take this, we wouldn't have a direct professional relationship anymore. You'd report to Marcus. You'd be compensated fairly for the strategic work you're already doing. And... He paused, forcing himself to say the vulnerable thing. And I could ask you to dinner without it being inappropriate. Cindy set the paper down carefully. Is this really what you want? Or are you doing what you always do, testing someone to see how they'll respond? The question hit him squarely. It's what I want. But I need you to know what you'd be getting into. I'm not easy to be with. I'm demanding and controlling, and I have a history of pushing people away when they get too close. I know all that. I've been working for you for almost a month. Working for me and being in a relationship with me are different things. Are they? Cindy tilted her head. Because from where I'm standing, I've already seen you at your worst. I've watched you be ruthless in business and generous when it matters. I've seen you angry and vulnerable and uncertain. I know who you are, Albert. The question is whether you're brave enough to let me keep knowing you. His heart was pounding. What if I fail? What if I mess this up like I've messed up every other relationship? Then we'll deal with it. But you don't get to decide for both of us that it won't work. That's not protecting me. That's protecting yourself. She was right. She was absolutely right, and the clarity of it was both terrifying and liberating. Take some time to think about the offer, Albert said. This isn't a decision you should make impulsively. I don't need time. Cindy picked up the paper, folded it, and handed it back to him. I'm not taking the job. Albert felt his stomach drop. Oh. Because, she continued, a smile playing at her lips, I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice as your assistant. I'll finish out properly, help transition whoever replaces me, and then I'll accept the strategic advisor position. That way there's no question about impropriety or using a job offer to coerce a relationship. That's very ethical of you. I'm a very ethical person. She stood, moving closer to him. But I should tell you something. I didn't take this job just to learn from you. I mean, that was part of it. But I've been watching Johnson Global for 2 years, reading everything I could about you, and I wanted to understand what made you so successful. What I found was someone brilliant and difficult and so afraid of being vulnerable that he'd rather be alone than risk being hurt. That's a harsh assessment. It's an accurate assessment. And somewhere in these past 4 weeks, I stopped wanting to just learn from you. I started wanting to actually know you. The real you, not the billionaire CEO everyone else sees. She paused. That's why the boundaries mattered. Because I needed to know this was real, not just proximity and convenience. Albert reached out, his hand finding hers. It's real. Terrifyingly real. Good. Cindy squeezed his hand. Terrifying is where interesting things happen. Thursday afternoon, Cindy submitted her formal resignation letter. By Friday morning, the office was buzzing with speculation. The woman who'd lasted longer than any assistant in Albert Johnson's history was leaving, and everyone had theories. I heard she got a better offer, someone whispered near the break room. I heard Johnson finally pushed her too far, someone else countered. No, I heard they're dating and she had to quit for ethical reasons. A third voice chimed in. Albert ignored all of it. He'd learned years ago that trying to control gossip was like trying to control the weather, pointless and exhausting. What mattered was the truth, and the truth was that for the first time in his adult life, he was choosing something personal over something professional. That afternoon, he and Cindy had to sit through an exit interview with Sandra from HR. Sandra tried to remain professional, but her curiosity was evident. And you're leaving because... Sandra prompted. I'm accepting a different position within Johnson Global, Cindy explained. Strategic advisor, reporting to Marcus Chen. Sandra's eyes flicked to Albert, then back to Cindy. I see. And this transition is amicable. Extremely, Albert said. Very professional, Cindy added, and there was a hint of humor in her voice that only he caught. After the meeting, they walked back to the office together. 2 weeks, Cindy said. Are you sure you can survive finding and training a new assistant in 2 weeks? I'm sure it will be miserable, Albert admitted. But some things are worth being temporarily miserable for. Cindy's last day as Albert's assistant was bittersweet. She spent it creating the most comprehensive transition document anyone had ever seen. Every system, every preference, every quirk of Albert's schedule documented with meticulous detail. Her replacement, a competent man named David who'd come from one of their subsidiary companies, looked slightly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information. Don't worry, Cindy told him kindly. You won't remember everything at first. But the most important thing is that Mr. Johnson values efficiency and hates surprises. Keep him informed, stay 3 steps ahead, and don't take his temper personally. That's it. David asked. That's it. Oh, and he likes his coffee strong enough to dissolve steel, and he pretends not to have a sweet tooth but keeps chocolate in his bottom desk drawer. She was gathering her personal items from her desk when Albert appeared, holding a small wrapped box. Company tradition, he said. Going away gift. Cindy unwrapped it to find a beautiful fountain pen, engraved with her initials. It's lovely. It's practical. You'll need it in your new role. He paused. Are you ready? For the new job? Yes. For dinner tonight? She smiled. Terrified. But yes. That evening, Albert picked Cindy up from her apartment himself. No driver, no corporate car, just him in a BMW he rarely drove and a nervousness he barely recognized. She wore a simple black dress, and when she opened the door, he forgot whatever clever opening line he'd been rehearsing. You look beautiful, he said, and it came out more sincere than smooth. You look nervous, she observed. It's endearing. I don't do nervous. You're doing it right now. He'd made reservations at a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, not one of the trendy places where they'd be photographed and gossiped about, but a quiet neighborhood spot where they could actually talk. The owner, Giovanni, greeted them warmly and showed them to a corner table. So, Cindy said once they'd ordered wine, how does this work? Do we pretend the last month didn't happen and start fresh? Or do we acknowledge that we've already spent more time together than most people do on their first 10 dates? I think we acknowledge reality, Albert said, which is that I already know you take your coffee with too much cream, that you read voraciously but have terrible taste in reality TV, and that you hum when you're concentrating on something difficult. And I know you pretend to be harder than you are, that you avoid your family because you're afraid of disappointing them, and that you've never actually been in love even though you've been in many relationships. The last observation hung in the air between them. You're right, Albert said quietly. I've never been in love. I convinced myself I was a few times, but it was always more about the idea of the person than the reality. More about not being alone than actually connecting with someone. And now I'm terrified because this feels different. You feel different. And I don't have a script for this. Cindy reached across the table and took his hand. Good. Scripts are boring. Real is better. They talked through dinner, the conversation flowing easily between serious and playful, professional and personal. They discussed business strategies and childhood memories, debated everything from market trends to whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Cindy said yes, Albert was horrified, and somewhere between the main course and dessert, Albert realized he was happy. Actually, genuinely happy in a way that had nothing to do with achievements or acquisitions. After dinner, they walked through the village, the warm October evening perfect for wandering. Can I ask you something? Cindy said as they paused in Washington Square Park. Why me? You could have anyone. Why pursue something this complicated? Albert considered the question carefully. Because everyone else sees the billionaire. They see the power, the money, the success. You see the person. You call me out when I'm being unreasonable. You challenge my thinking. You're not impressed by any of the things that usually impress people. And somehow, that makes me want to be better. Not professionally. I'm already good at that. But personally, as a human being. That's a lot of pressure to put on one person. I'm not asking you to fix me or save me or complete me. I'm just asking you to be with me while I figure out how to be better at this, at letting someone in. Cindy turned to face him fully. I can do that. But I need you to know something. I'm not patient with game playing or hot and cold behavior. If you get scared and pull away, I need you to talk to me, not disappear. I need you to actually try, even when it's uncomfortable. I can do that, Albert said, and he meant it. Then kiss me already, Cindy said with a smile. Because this has been the slowest burn first date in history, and I'm tired of waiting. Albert laughed and pulled her close, and when he kissed her, it felt like something clicking into place, like a solution to a problem he'd been working on for years finally revealing itself. She kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for once in his carefully controlled life, Albert stopped thinking strategically and just felt. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Cindy grinned. Worth the wait. Definitely worth the wait. 3 months later, the relationship was nothing like Albert expected. It was harder than he thought, learning to communicate instead of just deciding things unilaterally, learning to be vulnerable instead of armored, learning that fights could be productive instead of relationship ending. But it was also better than anything he'd imagined. Cindy was brilliant in her new role, her strategic insights helping Johnson Global navigate a tricky acquisition in Southeast Asia that saved them millions. She reported to Marcus, which meant their work relationship was clean, but they collaborated frequently, and Albert found that he valued her professional opinion even more now that it wasn't clouded by employer-employee dynamics. Personally, they were learning each other's rhythms. Cindy learned that Albert needed time alone to process stress, and that pushing him to talk immediately usually backfired. Albert learned that Cindy's cheerful competence masked deep-seated fears about not being good enough, fears he understood all too well. They had their first real fight in December, about spending Christmas with his family. Albert wanted to skip it, claiming work obligations. Cindy called him out for avoiding his mother again. You can't just cut people out when they make you uncomfortable, she said, frustrated. That's your pattern, Albert. Something gets hard, you disappear. I'm not disappearing. I'm making a business decision. Bullshit. You're avoiding your mother because she asked you about us and you don't know how to talk about feelings with her. She was right, and he hated it. Fine. We'll go to Christmas dinner. Happy? No. Because you're agreeing to go while being passive-aggressive about it, which means you'll be miserable the entire time and make everyone else miserable too. They'd stared at each other, both angry, and then Albert had done something revolutionary. He'd apologized. "You're right. I'm being defensive because you're correct and I don't like being called out. I will genuinely try to be present at Christmas dinner instead of just showing up physically while being mentally absent." Cindy had blinked, surprised. "Wow. Growth. Don't sound so shocked. I'm capable of learning." "I know. It's one of the things I love about you." The words had slipped out naturally, and they'd both frozen. It was the first time either of them had used that word, love, and suddenly the fight seemed unimportant. "You love me?" Albert had asked, his voice uncertain. Yes. I do. I love you. Is that okay?" Albert had pulled her close, his heart pounding. "It's more than okay. Because I love you too. I'm probably terrible at it, and I'll definitely mess up constantly, but I love you." They'd kissed then, the fight forgotten, and Albert had marveled at how simple it was. Love wasn't a strategic decision or a calculated risk. It was just true. Christmas dinner with his family had actually been pleasant. Eleanor had adored Cindy, and Emma had pulled Albert aside at one point to whisper, "I take back all my criticism. You actually seem like a real person when you're with her." 6 months later, by April, they'd moved in together, Cindy's practical apartment replaced by Albert's penthouse, which she immediately set about making less sterile and more livable. She added plants and colorful throw pillows and photographs, and Albert pretended to be annoyed while secretly loving how the space felt like a home instead of a showroom. Work continued to go well. Johnson Global completed the European expansion successfully, and Cindy's strategic insights had been crucial to navigating regulatory challenges. The board of directors had taken notice, and there was talk of creating a chief strategy officer position specifically for her. But the biggest change was in Albert himself. His employees noticed that he was less harsh, more willing to listen to alternative viewpoints. His temper hadn't disappeared. He was still demanding and occasionally difficult, but it was tempered by something that looked like contentment. "You've changed," Marcus observed over lunch one day. "In a good way." "Have I?" "You're not operating from a place of fear anymore. Used to be, every decision you made was about protecting yourself, your business, your reputation, your emotions. Now you actually seem to trust that things can work out." Albert thought about that. Marcus was right. Somewhere in the past 6 months, he'd stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. He'd stopped testing Cindy to see if she'd leave. He'd just trusted. Trusted her, trusted himself, trusted the relationship. "She makes me want to be better," Albert said simply. "No," Marcus corrected gently. "She makes you feel safe enough to be yourself. There's a difference." That night, Albert came home to find Cindy on the balcony, working on her laptop. She looked up when he approached, smiling. "Bad day?" she asked, noting his expression. "Long day. But better now." He sat beside her. "Marcus said something today that got me thinking. Dangerous activity. He said you make me feel safe enough to be myself. And I realized is right. I spent so much of my life performing, being the ruthless CEO, being the untouchable billionaire, being someone who didn't need anyone. But with you, I don't have to perform. I can just be me, even the parts of me that are uncertain or flawed or still figuring things out." Cindy closed her laptop and turned to face him fully. "That's all I ever wanted. Not the billionaire, not the CEO. Just you. The real you. Even when the real me is difficult and controlling and occasionally an asshole. Especially then. Because you're also brilliant and generous and capable of more growth than you give yourself credit for." She paused. "Albert, I need to tell you something." His heart skipped. Those words, in his experience, usually preceded something bad. "What?" "I got offered a job. Chief Strategy Officer at Horizon Industries. They're a Johnson Global competitor, and they're offering me significantly more money and equity." Albert felt ice in his veins. This was it. This was where it ended, where she chose her career over him, where he learned once again that people left. When do you start? I'm not taking it. What? I'm not taking it, Cindy repeated firmly. I told them I appreciated the offer, but I'm exactly where I want to be. Johnson Global is building something special, and I want to be part of that. Plus, she added with a smile, the commute from this apartment to Horizon Industries would be terrible. Cindy, you can't turn down a huge opportunity because of me. I'm not. I'm turning it down because I genuinely want to stay where I am. If that changes, I'll tell you. But right now, I'm happy professionally and personally, and that's worth more than any salary increase. Albert pulled her close, relief and love washing over him in equal measure. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. 1 year later, Albert stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. His hands were shaking, actually shaking, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd been this nervous about anything. You're going to be fine, Marcus said from the doorway. He was serving as best man, a role he'd accepted with surprising enthusiasm. You've negotiated billion-dollar deals. You can handle proposing to your girlfriend. What if she says no? She's not going to say no. That woman is disgustingly in love with you. You don't know that. Albert, she chose you over a competing job offer. She moved into your place. She spent holidays with your family and calls your mother weekly. She's as committed to this as you are. Now stop spiraling and go propose already. Albert took a deep breath. Marcus was right. This past year with Cindy had been the best year of his life, full of challenges and growth and moments of profound happiness he hadn't known were possible. She'd met every part of him, the good, the bad, the still working on it, and chosen to stay anyway. He'd planned the proposal carefully. No grand public gesture, no dramatic scene. Just the two of them at the place where everything had started to change, the balcony of the Metropolitan Museum during another charity gala, the same spot where they'd stood together a year ago and felt something shift between them. When he found Cindy at the gala, she was in conversation with Margaret Caldwell, laughing at something the older woman had said. She wore a deep emerald dress that made her eyes luminous, and Albert's breath caught at the sight of her. Excuse me, he said, interrupting their conversation. May I steal her for a moment? By all means, Margaret said with a knowing smile. I believe you two have some unfinished business on a particular balcony. Cindy raised an eyebrow as Albert led her away. Did you tell Margaret your plan? I told no one. She's just eerily perceptive. They stepped out onto the balcony, and the city spread out before them exactly as it had a year ago, lights glittering, the sounds of traffic muted by height and glass. I've been thinking, Albert began. Dangerous, Cindy said, echoing her usual joke. About how a year ago, we stood in this exact spot, and I knew something was changing, but I was too afraid to name it. I'd spent so long protecting myself, building walls, making sure no one could get close enough to hurt me. And then you showed up and just walked right through every defense like they were made of paper. Albert, let me finish. Please. He took her hands. This year with you has taught me what I was missing. Not just companionship or partnership, though you're the best partner I could imagine, but actual vulnerability, actual trust. The knowledge that I don't have to be perfect or have everything figured out because you love me anyway. The real me, not the version I perform for the world. Tears were gathering in Cindy's eyes. You're making me cry at a gala. That's very rude. I'm not done being rude. Albert reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Cindy Reeves, you're the most brilliant, challenging, infuriating, wonderful person I've ever met. You see me, really see me, and somehow you choose to love what you see. I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. So I'm asking, will you marry me? He opened the box to reveal a ring, elegant and classic with a subtle modern edge, exactly like Cindy herself. For a moment that felt like an eternity, she just stared at the ring. Then she looked up at him, and her smile was radiant. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. Did you really think I'd say anything else? There was a possibility. She kissed him before he could finish the sentence, and Albert felt something settle in his chest, something that felt like coming home after being lost for a very long time. When they broke apart, Cindy held out her hand, and Albert slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. "It's perfect," she said, admiring it. "How did you know exactly what I'd want?" "Because I pay attention. You taught me that." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other as the city glittered below them. "So," Cinder said eventually, "do we go back inside and tell everyone? Or do we stay out here and savor this for a while?" "Let's stay," Albert said. "The rest of the world can wait." The Johnson Reeves household, because Cindy had insisted on hyphenating, claiming she'd built her own career and wasn't erasing it for anyone, was controlled chaos on Sunday mornings. Albert stood in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes while simultaneously reviewing a contract on his tablet. Cinder sat at the kitchen island, video calling his mother and sister, who were both giving unsolicited advice about the upcoming anniversary party. "I'm just saying," Eleanor's voice came through the speakers, "if you're going to have it catered, at least let me recommend someone who understands that presentation matters." "Mom, the food is fine," Albert called from the stove. Cindy picked the caterer. "Everything she picks is excellent." "Listen to him," Emma chimed in. "He's finally learned that his wife is right about everything. Only took him 35 years to figure that out." "I'm 36, Albert corrected. "My point stands." Cinder laughed, catching Albert's eye with a look of affectionate amusement. 2 years of marriage had somehow made them more themselves, her more confident in her role as Chief Strategy Officer, him more relaxed in his role as CEO, both of them better at this complicated business of being partners. "We have to go," Cindy said to the screen. "Albert is burning the pancakes, and if I don't intervene, we'll be ordering breakfast instead of eating it." After they hung up, Albert flipped a distinctly brown pancake onto a plate. "I wasn't burning them. I was making them extra crispy." "Is that what we are calling burnt now?" Cindy came around the island and took over, gently moving him aside. "Go sit down. You're brilliant at running a company but hopeless in the kitchen. That's why I married you. Division of labor. You married me because I was the only person crazy enough to put up with you." "That too." They ate breakfast together, trading sections of the newspaper and discussing the week ahead, meetings and travel and all the mundane details that made up a life. It was ordinary and domestic and everything Albert had never thought he wanted. "I have something to tell you," Cinder said as they were cleaning up. Albert froze, dish towel in hand. "Good something or bad something?" "Good something. At least, I think it's good. But it will change things." "Cindy, you're killing me." She turned to face him, and there was nervousness and excitement in her expression. "I'm pregnant." The dish towel fell from Albert's hand. "You're what?" "Pregnant. About 10 weeks. I just found out yesterday, but I wanted to tell you in person, not over the phone while you were in meetings." She watched his face anxiously. "Are you okay? We talked about kids eventually, but if this is too soon." Albert crossed the space between them in 2 steps and pulled her into his arms. "Too soon. Cindy, this is." He pulled back to look at her face. "We are having a baby. We are having a baby." Joy flooded through him, pure and uncomplicated. "We are having a baby," he repeated, and then he was laughing and kissing her and feeling like his heart might actually burst from happiness. "I'll take that as a positive response," Cinder said when he finally let her breathe. "Positive? This is incredible. You're incredible. I love you so much." "I love you too, even if you do burn pancakes." Albert pulled out his phone immediately. "I need to call my mom. And Marcus. And Albert." Cindy gently took his phone. "We have time. Let's just sit with this for a bit. Just us. Before we tell the whole world and it becomes real to everyone else." He nodded, understanding. They moved to the couch, Cindy curling into his side, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "I'm going to be terrible at this," Albert said after a moment. "I don't know anything about being a father." "You'll learn. We both will. Together." She looked up at him. "You know what's funny? 3 years ago, you thought no one would last more than a month in your life. Now look at us. Married, building a family, actually happy. All because you refused to quit. All because you finally let someone in. Albert kissed the top of her head, thinking about the journey that had brought them here, from that first morning when she'd walked into his office with confidence and determination, through all the challenges and growth and moments of choosing each other over fear. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For turning my world upside down. For seeing past the walls I built. For loving the person I am instead of the person I thought I needed to be. For staying when I gave you every reason to leave. For everything. Cindy tilted her head up to kiss him. You're welcome. But you should know, I didn't stay despite who you are. I stayed because of who you are. All of it. The brilliant parts and the broken parts and the parts still healing. That's what love is, Albert. It's not finding someone perfect. It's finding someone whose imperfections fit with yours in a way that makes both of you better. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just finally started listening. They sat there as morning turned to afternoon, talking about the future, names and nursery colors and how they'd balance work and parenthood and all the challenges that lay ahead. But underneath all the planning and preparation was a foundation they'd built together, trust, vulnerability, and the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Albert Johnson had spent most of his life believing that success meant standing alone at the top, untouchable and invulnerable. It had taken Cindy Reeves walking into his office and refusing to be intimidated to teach him the truth. That real success, the kind that actually mattered, was letting someone stand beside you. Was building something with another person that was bigger and better than anything you could create alone. No one had lasted more than a month in Albert Johnson's life. Until Cindy came along and didn't just last, she stayed. She challenged him. She changed him. She loved him, and in return, he'd learned to do the same. 5 years later, the office Christmas party was in full swing when David, who'd replaced Cindy as Albert's assistant 5 years ago and had since become a valued member of the executive team, approached with a nervous-looking young woman. Mr. Johnson, this is Melissa Andrews. She's interviewing for the assistant position. Albert shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact, good signs. Welcome, Melissa. Fair warning, I have a reputation for being difficult. So I've heard, sir. They actually have a pool going about how long I'll last. Albert glanced at David, who had the grace to look embarrassed. Still. It's tradition at this point, David admitted. Well, Ms. Andrews, I can tell you that my previous assistants fell into two categories, those who couldn't handle the pressure and quit, and one who was so exceptionally talented she became my wife and is now Chief Strategy Officer. Melissa's eyes widened. Mrs. Johnson was your assistant. For about a month, Cinda said, appearing beside them with their 3-year-old daughter Lily on her hip and their infant son James balanced in her other arm. Best worst month of my life. Worst. Albert protested. You were insufferable. I just happened to be more stubborn than you were difficult. She turned to Melissa. My advice? Don't let him intimidate you. Underneath all the bluster, he's actually a decent human being. It just takes a while to find it. Thanks for the character assassination, Albert said dryly, but he was smiling. Melissa looked between them, clearly trying to reconcile the legendary difficult CEO with the man who was now making faces at his toddler. So, is there actually hope of lasting more than a month? Absolutely, Cinda said. Just remember that competence and confidence will get you further than fear and flattery. And if you're really exceptional. She looked at Albert with unmistakable love. Well, you might just turn his whole world upside down. That only worked once, Albert said, kissing his wife's temple. Positions already filled. Wife, partner, love of my life. The assistant role is purely professional. Good to know, Melissa said, laughing. I'll stick to being professionally excellent and leave the life-changing. Thank you so much for taking your precious time watching. Please, before you leave, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you are watching from.